Welcome to our very first episode of Building Backwards, a Journey to Our Roots. Today is a very special episode, not just because it's the first episode, not just because it's the very brand new start to a brand new year, but because this is the foundation of where this podcast is going. But before we get into it, I also want to introduce you to our merch store. So to get to the merch store, the easiest way as of right now is to go through our link tree. So linktree/Royal Roots, and then the first selection, Royal Roots VA, will give you a preview of the merchandise that is available. You can click on Shop My Products, and it'll take you to our homepage. Right now, it'll show the featured items that we have, as well as scrolling down to some of the other designs. You can search by apparel or accessories and so forth. Right now, we just have 2 designs available, but I will be adding them over time, and the link tree will always have an up-to-date link. Now, let's get into today's episode. So, today we're talking about the history of the Black homesteader. Today, we're going to shed some light on some incredible stories of Black homesteaders throughout history. Before we dive deep into this topic, let's talk about some background information. Homesteading refers to the process of acquiring or settling on a piece of land. In the United States, the Homesteading Act of 1862 allowed individuals, including freed slaves, to claim up to 160 acres of public land. This policy aimed towards encouraging westward expansion and provide opportunities for land ownership and self-sufficiency. So to make a claim on one of these pieces of property, a homesteader paid a filing fee of $18, $10 fee to make a temporary claim on the land, and $2 commission to the land agent. They would then live on this land for 5 years and cultivate it and make improvements, such as build a house, barn, or plant. They would then return to the land office and submit their final proof and final payment of $6. Now, this may not be a lot of money altogether, like in today's money, but back then that did present some obstacles for people of color. There were a few, though, that were able to be successful. One of them's name was Peter Clark. Peter Clark was a Louisiana homesteader, born January of 1855. He traveled to the land office in New Orleans on April 15th of 1887 and applied for 159.33 acres of land under the Homestead Act of 1862. This land was in Livingston Parish, Louisiana. For 7 years, Peter Clark cleared 5 acres of that 159, and he built a outhouse, and grew an assortment of crops to sustain and support his family. He had a network of family and friends who also resided nearby to help out. In October of 1895, Peter submitted proof to the land office in New Orleans that he had complied with the homesteader's rules for settlers. Peter received his homestead land patent in 1896 and resided on that land until 1909. It's unclear if Peter's family did continue to farm the land after his passing. I couldn't find any records of what happened to the land or if the family still has it in their possession. However, there was one homesteader whose family continued to maintain the property and is still in his descendants' possession to this day. George Jones was a Florida homesteader. He was born in South Carolina, September 1846. In January of 1891, under the Homestead Act, George filed a homestead entry for federal land in the amount of 40.05 acres. George settled on that land in April of 1891 and moved his family to La Crosse in the summer of 1893. 5 years after filing his initial application, George gave notice of his intention to make final proof to establish his claim on the land. He returned to the land office in April of 1896 to prove his residence and cultivation. In his testimony, he stated that he and his wife and 11 children lived continuously on this land since April of 1891. He added a log dwelling house, a kitchen, a corn crib, fencing, and trees. He valued his land at $200. The land still belongs to the Jones family in La Crosse, Florida, to this day. But not everybody wanted to farm land. There were some African Americans who wanted to obtain property and build a home for them and their families. In comes Mahalia Ashley Dickerson. Mahalia Dickerson was a lawyer and civil rights activist from Montgomery, Alabama. She was born October of 1912 and earned a law degree in 1945 from Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C. Dickerson returned to Alabama, where she became the first Black female lawyer in the state in 1948. She took a vacation to Alaska and fell in love with the picturesque scenery. Mahalia then filed a claim for 160 acres in Wasilla, Alaska in 1958. Dickerson was the first female Black homesteader. A few months later, Dickerson passed the Alaska State Bar and became the first Black lawyer in Alaska. She eventually opened law offices in Wasilla and Anchorage. Dickerson was one of the examples of people who just wanted to purchase the land and build a home for her and her family. This next young lady was probably my favorite to research. Her name was Letitia Carson. Now, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I do hope that I am. But Letitia Carson was born a slave in Kentucky around 1815. The exact year is unknown. She moved to Oregon with David Carson, an Irish immigrant who owned land. He was the father of her children and possibly her slave owner. When they moved to Oregon, she wasn't welcome there. They didn't really want any Black people to live there. But in September of 1852, David Carson died. Letitia and her children were excluded from his estate settlement, and a wealthy neighbor, a white man named Greenberry Smith, was named the executor of his estate instead. Miss Carson filed a lawsuit and took Mr. Smith to court to recover the equitable portion of David's estate. She stated that David promised that in the event of his death, she would be the sole heir. Even though this wasn't in writing, May 12th of 1855, Carson was awarded $300 by the Benton County jury, plus $229 to pay her court costs. On October 25th, 1856, a federal court awarded her $1,399.75 for the loss of her cattle, but she still couldn't own land legally. In 1862, however, the Homestead Act changed all of that. At the General Land Office in Rosenberg, Oregon, on June 17, 1863, she filed a Homestead Act claim for just under 154 acres in South Myrtle Creek. On October 1, 1869, President Grant certified Carson's claim, making her the only Black woman in Oregon to successfully secure a claim. She built a 2-story home, a barn, and a smokehouse on the property, which she also included some fruit trees. In 1870, the census listed her real estate and personal property value at $1,000. Carson lived another 20 years on her property before she died at the age of 73 or 74 in February of 1888. It's unclear if her 2 kids came back and lived on the land after her death, but Martha, her daughter, moved onto an Indian reservation and married a couple of times before Letitia died. Andrew was also married and stayed in the county in which they had originally settled. So I'm not sure what happened to the land after that. But this story was so impactful because Miss Carson was born a slave and died a landowner. Black homesteaders faced significant obstacles due to systematic racism and discrimination. However, they persevered and made remarkable contributions. Many Black homesteaders migrated to the Great Plains, particularly in the states like Kansas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska. They established thriving communities, built schools, churches, and businesses, and formed tight-knit networks of support. One inspiring figure is an Exodusters leader named Benjamin Pap Singleton. He encouraged Black people to leave the South and settle in Kansas, where they could claim land under the Homesteading Act. Singleton's efforts helped thousands of African Americans escape the oppressive conditions in the post-Civil War South, one of the first all-Black settlements established by homesteaders. Despite facing hardships, the settlers in Nicodemus created a community and played a significant role in the development of Kansas. The Black homesteading movement had a ripple effect on the broader African American community. It provided opportunities for economic self-sufficiency, independence, and acquisitions of land, which was denied to many Black people for centuries. It also challenged the prevailing narrative that Black people were incapable of owning and managing their own land. It's a powerful legacy, and the history of Black homesteading is a testament to the resilience, determination, resourcefulness of African Americans. It reminds us of the enduring spirit of Black entrepreneurship, self-resilience, and the pursuit of the American dream. It serves as a powerful example for future generations and highlights the need to recognize and celebrate often overlooked contributions in Black Americans throughout history. And so I wanted to start this podcast off with the very first episode being about the history of the Black homesteader, because I do want to go in the direction of homesteading for this podcast, but also the African American community as a whole, and how generations can learn from our past. And we should get back to those basic core values so that we as a culture can again thrive. So thank you for joining me on the first episode of Building Backwards, a journey to our roots. And until next time, y'all, be blessed.